So hello out there, my name is Jonas, and I'm beaming to you from my at-home conference stage where usually my audience lately has just been one house cat. So this should be a fun change of pace for us. Thank you for tuning in. So I wanted to start out by talking about design portfolios. Lately I've been looking at design portfolios and I've noticed that a lot of them say things like this. I'm passionate about leveraging user delight to drive engagement for brands and improve business value. Now, when I read things like this, I have to say, no, you are not passionate about that. Is anyone on earth really passionate about leveraging user delight to drive engagement for brands? I'm going to say no. So why are people saying things like this? I think it's because they're speaking the language that they think tech companies want to hear. And in 2020, tech companies seem to care a whole lot about engagement and business value. You could even say they're passionate about it. Now, that's because most companies have an insatiable appetite for growth. They have to demonstrate endlessly positive business metrics quarter after quarter to satisfy shareholders and investors. Every quarter has to beat the last, which means every quarter, everyone's a little bit more desperate to squeeze some more performance out of the business. And then it just keeps going and going and going. Now, who's caught in the middle of that? Well, do you remember those users whose supposed delight we've been leveraging for engagement? Well, they're just a pawn in the middle of this formula. They're a means to an end, a target for advertisement, or a data point on a balance sheet. They're just a user using stuff. That's the way we think of them. And we, as designers, will do whatever it takes to get that user to stay in our apps longer, to come back again and again, to get them to click on more stuff. And we use some psychological and sometimes dishonest persuasive techniques to do it because our business models depend on it. That's the way we've built a lot of our software businesses. And you can see in these examples some effects of that, like nagging about notifications or badges or sneaking contacts into your phone, things like that. And we've somehow deluded ourselves into believing that this arrangement is actually noble. Like we are somehow these mystical saviors creating some kind of transitive emotional delight from the majesty of our Figma boards, stunning people with our perfectly crafted digital experiences, instead of what's often really happening, which is manipulative tech addiction for corporate profit. So this is the upsetting state of software product design in 2020. And many of the design patterns and the practices that we've all just learned to live with are rather fundamentally bad for people. And we haven't admitted it to ourselves. And the only way that we can improve this is to recognize that we are having harmful effects on people. And we can intentionally inform our design decisions to reduce those effects. You can do this even if you work at one of those growth-obsessed companies, although admittedly it'll be a little harder. Now, I work at a company called Basecamp, and we do things a completely different way. We're independently profitable and privately owned, and we stay small on purpose. We only have about 50 employees. So we don't really have to care all that much about growth from year to year. We don't have any investors or shareholders to answer to. We only answer to ourselves and our customers. So we can focus a lot more on doing the right things without feeling the pressure of outside influence. So we don't design products just to juice our business performance. We're in this because we want to make great products and we want to make useful, respectful tools that help people solve real problems in their lives. And then, of course, we do also hope that business performance follows from that. But if it doesn't, at least we've made something that we're proud of and we believe in, and we can try again, right? So this is a key point, and I'm going to repeat it. The secret to making good products and to simultaneously reduce the current ills and harms that the software industry is causing is to always care about people first. Care about people more than you care about your business. This philosophy will affect all the decisions you make that follow from that. People first, money later. So everything else I'm going to talk about in this talk is about that idea. Okay? So now I'm going to introduce you to our new email service, which is called Hey. Hey is a radical rethinking of how email works, and it completely flips traditional power structures to give you vastly more control over how you receive and triage and read email. And to be perfectly clear, this is not an advertisement for Hey. We think Hey is great, but use whatever email app you want. I'm just going to be using Hey as an example of how we've put a lot of these principles and ideas into practice. So when we first started designing Hey, we looked at the sorry state of email, and we began asking lots of questions. Like, how can we design an app to protect people's attention, defend them against being tracked, eliminate their anxiety about email, and restore a sense of calm when people are using their email app? How can we also help people reduce their email volume so they spend less time in our app and more time doing something else, whatever they actually want to do? Now, this is the literal opposite of engagement, right? And finally, how can we make email feel rich and personal and interesting again after so many decades of stagnation and common copycat apps? So these were some of the big picture ideas that we had swimming around in our heads, kind of unformed as we started to work on the product. Now, it's one thing to have some principles and big ideas about how things ought to work, but how do we actually go about building a product that does these things, that reduces obligation, that protects attention, that doesn't track people, gives people more free time, and so on? These seem like hard things to do, and they're not usually priorities for people making software. So I thought about it a lot, and I think there are 5 steps that you can take to get there in your work. So I'm going to go through those one at a time. So here we go. Okay, the first one, step 1, is called human workflows. So our approach to building software starts with taking a hard look at what people really do and then designing ideas around that. So we try to factor in psychological and emotional pressures someone might be feeling, and we build the product to address those however it can through thoughtfully constructed workflows and just enough tools that empower people to be more efficient and more productive, but without overwhelming them and giving them too much power that's kind of overwhelming. And to do this, we have to cast aside all of our existing assumptions about how software currently works to get down to the real foundations of how people work. And only then can we build something back up again that meaningfully improves on the status quo. So in making Hey, we looked closely at the million little hacks that people have used for decades to manage their email. These are things like keeping an email unread so you remember to get back to it, even though you've already read it, or obsessively trying to maintain an inbox zero discipline, or building up a complex filtering and labeling system just to keep any sense of order in this avalanche of email you're getting. These were all extremely painful friction points that we've all just begrudgingly accepted as how email works. This is partly why everyone hates email and they keep trying to kill it. But what if it didn't have to work like that? What if the software actually tried to solve these human problems for you? So one premier example of how we achieved this is Hey's screener feature. Biggest problem with email is that there's simply too damn much email. And often you can't easily get out of it. The control is all with the person sending you email, and you just have to take it. So you're left with this daily obligation to constantly keep up with all these emails that you might not even want. Every single one of those unwanted emails is like a tiny little microaggression that computers are just forcing you to deal with. In Hey, we flip the script. So anytime someone emails you, you have to decide if you want to hear from them or not. And whenever you say no, your email volume drops a little bit. And if you say no a lot, then your email volume drops by orders of magnitude, which means that you have fewer pointless obligations and less overall email. This also means, accordingly, that you'll spend a lot less time in Hey the longer you use it because you won't have as much email to read. Now, this is a feature that an engagement-obsessed company who's looking to leverage user delight, or one that depends on advertising as a business model, would never choose to do because it would hurt their bottom line. They would lose money by building this feature. And here you can see why those business models are fundamentally at odds with this people-first design philosophy. For another workflow example, in Hey, you can queue up emails that you need to reply to later, and then quickly reply to all of them in a batch. So that's another case where we thought a lot about what people actually do. Sometimes you get email, you don't have time to reply to it right now. So we built a feature exactly around that to make this an easier thing to deal with. It's another human workflow. Okay. In step 2, I'm going to talk about unsticky interfaces. Now, you've probably heard the term sticky interfaces, and if you haven't, it's an umbrella term that describes using those tricks and techniques that draw people back into your app to keep them engaged and hooked on your product. Now, you might think that sticky interfaces are mostly like nasty dark patterns that only the most evil-minded designers are using. But that's really not the case at all. This is not just some extremist philosophy about how to build products. It's a widely accepted idea and a pretty common practice in almost all software products. In fact, there are even books written about how to do this exact thing, including this book, which is actually called Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, right? So a lot of what we think of as basic software functionality is founded in this stickiness idea. These are things like unread badges, or nagging push notifications, or infinite scrolling social media streams, or teasers about activity you may have missed so you get FOMO and have to click through. All of those types of things. These design patterns are substantially responsible for why we're all glued to our phones all day. Think about how many times in an afternoon your phone buzzes or vibrates to get your attention. Every single one of those little buzzes was an intentional design choice that some designer in some software shop decided to make. They decided that their app was important enough that it should interrupt what you were doing and draw you in. Now that's a powerful decision, and we shouldn't take it so lightly. So in Hey, again, we thought about this the total opposite way. Email is already one of the stickiest communication tools on the planet. Almost nobody needs to be more hooked into checking their email. So we thought, how can we make it as unsticky as possible? How could we untether people from this crappy relationship that they have with email? Now, we did this in several ways, but the most meaningful one is that Hey's notifications are off by default, and there's no way to turn them on for all email. It's simply not possible. You can selectively choose to get notified about new emails from a certain person, or you could get notified about emails on a certain thread, or you could get notified about emails categorized as important that you chose. But that's it. Now, it might sound insane to have an email app that doesn't always automatically notify you about new email right out of the box, but that is the people first choice. Hey has no unread counts, no nags, and no gimmicks to bring you back in. You can use the app peacefully when you feel like it, and then come back later whenever you want. You can choose exactly what you're willing to be interrupted about. You don't have to be nagged to check your email, because you probably check it anyway. We're all conditioned to check it. So we don't need any sticky tricks. That's enough, right? Now in step 3, I'm going to talk about intentional friction. This is an idea where we have an opinion about how people should use the product. So we add friction in certain places to specifically discourage certain behaviors that might be more upfront or more easy to access in less opinionated apps. Now, this idea also sounds completely counterintuitive because usually designers are trained to reduce as much UI friction as they can, right? But I believe that our goal shouldn't be no friction at all. It should be used selectively. It's okay to slow people down and to emphasize the important things over the secondary things. Friction in an interface is an art form, actually, and if you use it wisely, you can encourage healthy interaction patterns in the same way that filmmakers might use silence or transitions to give viewers time to process a scene that they just saw before moving on to the next one. If we make things a little harder in our app to do, it will discourage people from doing that very frequently, right? So for example, almost all traditional email apps look pretty much like this. This is Gmail. They usually have a permanent sidebar with many links to various mailboxes on the left and unread indicators on all the boxes and tabs and everything. Now, these interfaces are dense and complex. They're low friction in the way that like an aircraft cockpit is low friction. All of the controls and buttons and capabilities are all right there, right in your face, immediately available, so you can pretty much jump around and do anything instantly. But the cost of that is you're constantly bombarded with information and widgets and noise. So the psychological effect of using an app like this is an ongoing feeling of tension. There's always something more you have to do. There's some badge you need to clear. There's some element vying for your attention. Even if you've managed to keep up with your email, it's hard to ever look at this and feel calm. And let's remember, email is not a commercial aircraft. There's no reason anybody needs to have this level of cockpit complexity just to triage and read messages. right? We've gone too far. So we need to pare it back a little bit. And that's what we did with Hey. In Hey, the inbox looks like this. First of all, we called it the inbox because it only has emails that are important, because you've decided that up front by who you've agreed to let in. And there's just some room to breathe. There's room to stretch out. Everything's less packed in, there's less to see, and there's less you have to do. You notice there's also a lot less navigation. There's no sidebar, there's no buttons, there's no unread numbers, there's no bold, unread emails. It's just simple and plain, right? It just feels like a calmer place to be. That was the idea. Now, to get around in the app, we have one single button at the top with a menu that has links and buttons to get to all your other mailboxes, which means it takes a little bit more effort to navigate around than it would in Gmail. And that's exactly what we want. We want to have a little more friction here on purpose. We did this to provide a calmer experience in general, which means less multitasking, less distraction, fewer buttons, more focus, more clarity, and to demote everything except the inbox as a second-tier view. Now, we certainly could make it faster to go to other places in the app, but we don't really want you to go there very much. Our opinion is, all these other places are kind of not that important. Check them whenever, maybe once a day, maybe once a week, whatever you prefer. It doesn't matter, you get to pick. And the navigation and the app layout all follow from that opinion. So that's intentional friction. Now in step 4, I'm going to talk about safety and respect. When you run a service or an app or a platform, it's your responsibility to defend people using that product, full stop. You have to keep them safe from abuse to the fullest extent that you can, which includes blatantly obvious problems like online harassment, but also more subtle and insidious abuses like secretly collecting data or leaking people's privacy or not having the proper security, leading people to get hacked and things. This is not just a matter of basic safety, it's a matter of respect. If you respect people and you care about them, you'll do all that you can to earn their trust and keep that trust by protecting their information and protecting their safety. It's what you do when you put people first. So in Hey, we looked at the practice of email marketing. And we decided we really don't like email marketing very much because it's a trick. Emails contain these little things that we call spy pixels. They're an invisible 1 pixel sized thing that you can't see, but that marketers and advertisers use to track what you did when you open an email. So these invisible spy pixels can send back lots of information, like when you read an email, where you were when you read it, what device you used to read it. And we decided this just isn't something that we want to support in our app. So we decided to block these practices outright. If you send an email that contains a spy pixel to Hey, Hey will block it and prevent the person who sent it from finding anything out about the user who opened it. We're not going to just stand idly by and let our customers get their privacy abused and invaded through our system by someone else. It's not a contract we've agreed to, right? So, we didn't have to do this. This is a thing that took extra work to do. We could have just made the email app and ignored this problem and carried on. But we thought about what we would want someone to do for us. And this is what we would want. We would not want to be tracked without our consent. And we're trying to manifest change in the industry by calling these sorts of things out. So that's what we did. And we built a little banner in the app so that if you do get an email that is tracking you, you get warned about it with this little banner. Now, Hey also has a mandatory 2-factor authentication system. So you can't use Hey unless you use 2-factor authentication, which, as you may know if you've used it, is kind of a pain. Like, nobody really likes 2-factor authentication. It's more work. It's kind of hard enough to even have passwords. But this is an email product, and email is incredibly important. It contains your bank records, your health records, your personal communication, all of this stuff that's really meaningful and important to you. And we want to keep it as safe as we possibly can. So we did the work to make 2FA and Hey as easy as we could. It's still difficult because it's just a difficult thing, but we did a pretty good job and we were able to make it mandatory so everyone has to use it. So it's another case where we prioritize safety over, ease of use or over our own wishes, which is like not to have to build a 2FA system, right? So, okay, that was safety and respect. Now, in our last step, I want to talk about clarity and novelty. At Basecamp, clarity is king. We aim to make our UI as obvious and self-explanatory as we possibly can by keeping individual screens simple, showing only one focused thing at a time, and explaining things with good writing, and some other techniques too. Internally, we call this idea Fisher-Price design. And for all you non-parents out there, Fisher-Price is a toy company that makes little technological, mechanical toys for very young children. And the only way that those toys can be successful is for them to be intuitively designed to such an extent that they are very clear and easy to pick up, so the kids can discover and learn how to interact with them without any instruction or prior knowledge about how the toy is supposed to work. Because very young kids literally may not have any prior knowledge, right? So we try to use that same philosophy in our software. We can't assume that our customers are email-obsessed weirdos like we are, or experts at little software widgets, right? The product has to clearly guide normal people through the system so that they can use it successfully without complexity or obfuscation or hidden settings or things that are difficult to figure out. If people need to reach for an instruction manual, then we didn't nail it. So we try not to have one. The main way that we achieve clarity in our UI design is by separating complicated tasks into simple screens and then carefully explaining things with words, which means we have to make space for text, which is a thing that some designers don't do. A lot of designers prefer having very minimalist UIs, like little buttons that are unlabeled, or icons, abstractions, menus that just have little lines, the hamburger menu. We don't do that. We try to explain everything when we can. And so in this approach, there's no need to read the manual because the product just plainly tells you what to do at every step. The product is the manual. It's built in. That's our key approach to clarity, and it's always worked well for us. The other thing I was going to talk about was novelty. So if you're starting out to make an app, it can be kind of tempting to think that you need to do everything that all the other products do. Like if you're going to make an email app, you look at the email category and say, well, what are all these other apps going to do? We have to have every single one of those features, and we probably ought to look the same because that's what people expect. But in reality, that thinking is a trap. Why bother making another product that's exactly like all the others, but with the furniture moved around a little bit? In this slide, I'm showing you a picture of 4 different email products for the Mac. These are 4 unique different apps from different companies. But could you tell? Would you even know? Why are we doing this? Why is everyone just doing the same thing? Why would you spend a year, 2 years, 3 years doing all the hard work to get something built and figure it out, only to have it be one of many of the same looking product? Doesn't make any sense. I don't see the reason. So we believe that you have to do something fresh and show people something new in order to pique their interest and change the trajectory of software, of the industry. So, but at the same time, novelty just for the sake of it isn't worth anything either. So you might go too far and add gimmicky features or try to be clever with your interface. And then that ultimately just creates a shallow experience. So that might get someone to try the product or download it because it looks interesting, but unless it also empowers them in some way, they won't stick around to keep using it. So the sweet spot that we've found is identifying these real-life problems to solve through human workflows, and then solving them in a new way, coming up with a new idea. Now, obviously this is harder than it sounds, but it's actually not that hard if you're willing to open your mind beyond what's already been done before. So if you kind of just tune out all those other apps, ignore what they do, and don't worry about matching them feature for feature, and think about, what do you want? What should this do that's new, that you're missing in your experience? Design it for yourself, which is what we do. So in Hey, we built all sorts of small, novel little features that make the experience of dealing with email just a little bit friendlier, a little bit more personal, a little bit more human. So for example, you can clip out bits of emails and keep the clippings around for quick reference later, like a shipping notification or a phone number you might need. You can add personal notes to emails in your inbox. So if you need to set yourself a reminder, say like, oh, don't forget, I need to get back to this person, whatever the note might be, you can do that. You can just stick it on there, right? Like you would with a sticky note on your desk. You can set emails aside into a little stack, just like you would on your desk. And then if you need to get back to those emails, they fan out and you can pick the one you need. Or you could put newsletters into this feed view and read them in a pleasant way, just like you normally would read a feed, whenever you have time. So none of these features individually make or break whether Hey is a successful product. None of these features exist in any other email apps. But in the aggregate, they add up to a completely novel experience that's useful in a dozen ways that other email apps aren't, which makes it a lot easier for us to go and talk to a conference and explain what makes Hey different, right? Which is a useful thing for marketing and advertising and growing a product. So if you care about growing a product, there's another way to do it. So to recap, these are the 5 big things that we think about in people-first design: human workflows, unsticky interfaces, intentional friction, safety and respect, clarity and novelty. If you think about these 5 points and focus on them in your own work, you're going to find that the way you approach problems and the solutions that you create are different than they might have been before you thought about these things. Now, the last point I'm going to leave you with is this. As product people, meaning designers or product managers, programmers, CEOs, executives, everybody who's making products, we all have a lot of power, a lot more power than we might think we do. We can say yes or no in a million different ways, and even the small decisions that we say yes to can reverberate exponentially when you start applying it to the size of our audiences. For example, let's say you've decided that you do want to grow engagement in your app, and you start sending out 1 push notification per day to everyone who uses the app. So that's just 1 notification a day. But let's say your app has 50,000 people using it. You've just decided to interrupt people in total 50,000 times in 1 day. You've sent out 50,000 interruptions in 1 day. In a week, that would be 350,000 interruptions you've sent out. In a month, 10,500,000 interruptions. And over the course of a year, 126 million times you've interrupted people just by deciding to send 1 notification per day. Now multiply that by maybe more than 1 notification per day, or by all the apps who've decided to do the same thing and send 1 per day. Think about that in the aggregate. Think about the absolute numbers of the work that you're doing, and it will weigh on you in a way that it didn't until you thought about it. If you think, is this push notification really worth interrupting people this much? Like, do I want to do that? Does that make me feel good? If the answer is yes, then it's okay. But if the answer is no, rethink it. Start again, okay? So, to recap, you have power, use it wisely, okay? That's it. Thank you so much for watching and tuning in. If you want to find me ranting about these sorts of things elsewhere, I'm on Twitter at Jonas Downey. And if you want to check out Hey, we would love to have you, of course. That's available at hey.com. And if you have any questions about this talk or further ideas, or you want to know more, just reach out. I'd be happy to talk to you. Okay? Thank you so much.